Mhm. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this new session of Food for Thought. Today, I am going to cover about more deep introduction about Node.js, and in this case, using React.js. But let me share my screen because it's more important than my face. Okay, perfect. I will stop my video just in case. Okay, so what I am going to show you is a public repo in GitHub, so you could find in github.com slash nsolution slash react hyphen and d hyphen demo. So this is a pretty basic example about how to use and d in using Node.js and some the tools in order to try to understand how to do that. Okay, so at first I am going to clone this repository in my machine just to show you I am not doing something you cannot do at home. Okay, let's say git clone. This is demo, and I am going to clone React and the demo in my machine. Okay, so I'm going to the demo. Okay, this is a let me show you the structure. So this is the README, obviously, because I have some instruction in order you could use the application. And let me try to dissect the content of this project. Okay, first, when you started, as I said in the past session about how to integrate React with Symfony and Drupal, I show you this file package.json. So let me try to cover in detail. So this file is pretty similar. Maybe it was inspired in Composer for Symfony users and Drupal users, where you could define several things. So first, obviously, you need to provide information about the description of your project. So what file is the entry file in your application, because this is a Node.js application. Obviously, the description or title of the project. I will cover this later. Then you have the authors, could be one or more person. You need to define the license, in this case, just for example. Obviously, this is public, but I say this is proprietary, but just as an example. And then you need to define two kind of dependencies. You have dependencies of the application and dependencies in your dev. What is the difference? Okay, so because right now I am trying to build a single page application, which is the concept with React in the team. Like you create a bundle JavaScript file that you could deliver to any browser, older or newer, and will be available because in this single bundle you have everything. You have the CSS, you have the JavaScript, you have anything you need inside. Okay. So this is the elements you need to do to run the application. But for development, you need to do other tools. For instance, maybe you are coding your application and maybe you are using less in order to create your front-end styles in your site. But you don't need to deliver in your application the less. You need to deliver the CSS. For this reason, we need to have the preprocessors for less, and because we are using React, we need some less loader in order to create the bundle, and we need some way to transpile, because remember, React is if you find internet is as I said the last time, ES6. Oops, let me open here. ES6 is just the latest version of JavaScript, right? But the problem with ES6 and ES5, and this year ES7, there is not JavaScript standard. So that means you need to transpile into other JavaScript. So let me confirm. Okay, and it's still screening my screen. Okay, so you need to transform. For to do that, we need Babel, which is a tool exactly to do this transpile, to transform ES6 and 5 into normal JavaScript. And because we are coding in React, obviously we need some React components, right? In this case, React and React do is some internationalization, and On top of React, I am using another library named Andy. I will show you later in detail. But basically, this is the site. So imagine maybe we need to include an extra application. So that means you use the N package. So the first thing, when I download my project, what I need to do is run the npm install. So I have only one folder, okay? So I am going to say npm install. So this file is going to read all this file and check it out. This is this symbol. That means I need at least and the 2.5, but the latest version could be acceptable. At the moment I run the npm install. So he is trying, this command is trying to figure out what extra dependencies are required to run this library in your project and getting everything for you in creating a new folder. And this new folder is named node module. So it's a good idea to create a git ignore file if you are using git to ignore this file, because this folder is only required, and this is all the dependencies downloaded for you. Okay, so it's similar to composer. So imagine like a node model is your vendor folder, so you don't need to push that in production. It's just only for development. Okay, so with continue with the um, readme. The next thing is we need to compile. So I am going to run npm run dev. So what is npm run dev? So let's back to the package. So the idea is you could create some scripts. So in this case, I am running dev, which means I am running an internal command, which is webpack. Webpack is a dev dependency here in 1.3. Okay, and then he understands this is a command. This is a Node.js command, and now I am running with some specific configuration for this specific command. So okay, I compiled using Webpack, and this is the command just executed. And this command create a single bundle named client.js. Okay, this is 1.6 megabytes, but that means this file contains my full bundle application. This is all I need to run my application. But let's check it out how Webpack is in my system. So if I go to node modules, I will get a list of modules depending on my package JSON. And now I must have Webpack, and inside I have a bin, and then we have a Webpack JS. So that means instead of to write everything this path, package.json is enough intelligent to avoid us to type in everything. So we just need to say Webpack. So he uh, the the npm figure out all this road for us. So if I run with H, I could determine all the possible options I could to run this application. So we could create a script for everything. For the node modules that have some binaries to be executed standalone, because some libraries only are intent to import in your Node.js code and then execute some function, but only in the code, not in the command line. Okay, so okay, and this is the other. So for instance, this is how to create a webpack, but this time for production, and this is how I start my server. Okay, let me go back to the README. Okay, so after that, I could run a production if I want. I will show you later, or I could start a server. Okay, so let's check what is the server. So the server is running a command node, because this is a Node.js application. Of course, I have node, and then I am running server. So server is because I install a package, name it or library serve static. So that the idea is I could, without running Apache or Nginx or whatever, I could execute a server in my machine just to test what I did. Okay. So and because the entry point index.js, that means I could run my application. So I am going to run start, and now I have a server running in this port. Okay. And then I have a React.js application running in my machine. Okay, so I paying too much attention about the details how to get this point, because what happened when you are trying to get in Node.js information, maybe you read a lot about how to do the script specific in how to use React or everything, but starting from scratch without knowledge about Webpack, Node.js, or this kind of stuff is a kind of tough beginning. So for this reason, I want to focus in these tools. Okay, first. Okay, let me go again to the downloads folder, and I am going to create the last command in the README, which is the build, just to show the difference. Okay, this is React. Okay, okay, let me see. Remember when I run the build for depth, the whole file, the size is 1.6 megabytes. In this case, the difference is now I have the CSS separate, and I have the client with this separation. Now the size is a little small, but not too much. It's because in this configuration I didn't run a minification, I didn't run a compress. So this file with some changes could down to maybe 80 kilobytes, and maybe in a zip version could be 40 megabytes. So, but let's check first the code now, because maybe some people would be interested more in that. So let me check the server. So in the server, what I said, okay, I just need to connect, import my connection, the server static as I said before, and then you need to say in what port you are going to listen. In this case is the port 8000. Okay, and as any server, what server first look is the index HTML. Okay, so let's take a view about the index HTML. In the index HTML, so it's pretty basic. What I do is I always load the client.js, the build client slash client.js, and then I load the client CSS. So in the first version, I didn't have, so this included the CSS fail, but doesn't matter because all the CSS were included inside my bundle. But in the second build was separated, and in this case, the CSS doesn't fail. This doesn't include the CSS, but it still works. Okay, so this is not rocket science for a developer. Is just a JavaScript file that we need to include. Okay, so now let's go to my, okay, the bundle. If I check the bundle is a huge file, but let me check. So I just want to say had build client.js. And as you see, this is the transpile to transform ES6 to regular JavaScript. So this is a lot of lines that must to be included in order to be interpreted. A good interpretation for browsers like Internet Explorer 9 or superior. Okay, and now let's check it out the Webpack. So in Webpack, what I said is in order to do this uh, compression in the bundle. So I need to use some Node.js libraries. Obviously, I need Webpack. I need a path for determine where are the files in my system. This is something I am not use now. and this is something for optimization, like extract CSS, and for Windows user omit the to fix the backslash orientation slash or backslash. Okay. So first, I need to define my application. Then I need to define what plugins I am going to use for my processing. In this case, I am going to say, okay, I am going to check the extract text plugin, and the output will be some specific files I want. And then I say I will combine everything in one single file. The other is again optimization, nothing special, but maybe to make more sense is about you could define any plugins and then decide this is in my configuration, and then I'm going to say I am going to compile all files inside my folder app with the extension gxx, and the output will be for every single file here. I am going to create a new file with the same name I have here in the output. And in my case, because I want to be able to do some React some testing in console, I need to expose my React library to the windowed object in the browser. And to compile, I need to say, okay, this is a regular expression. This like for all these entries, I am going to process the gxx files. I am going to include this folder just in case there is some reference in my files will be resolved since this inclusion folder. I am going to exclude the Node.js, and I am going to use Babel for preprocessing. So imagine this is a big for with all these entries, and all entries must to be treated for some of these preprocessors. Like the CSS, all the CSS must to be resolved from this path, and I am going to use the style loader and the CS loader. In this case, I don't have less, but if I have less, then I need to include some less regex expression and provide, and instead of CSS loader, less loader. Just warning is I am using in this case is Webpack 1.x, but right now this is a version for Webpack 2.x. The syntax is pretty similar. Uh, the most important change is about the loaders are named now rules, and the way you call the loaders is a little different. They use a different syntax. But the concept is the same. So the other important file in my project is what I need to say to Babel. In this case, in Babel, I am going to say, okay, the presets I am going to transfer are ES 2015 and React. Because I am using Andy, which is another layer on top of React, then I have to include a plugin Andy. I will say everything will be compat. This is what enable the process to create the transpile. Okay. Okay. Now with that, I cover almost everything. Well, the other one is production. Um, in this case, this is an example about what I say is in production, we process the less using the loader, using CSS and less loader. You could, in 1.1, in 1.x in a webpack, you could say CSS, but in 2.x, you need to say CSS hyphen loader and less hyphen loader. But in essence, it's the same. It's the same file or the other because I don't have minification and I don't have compression. And regards the code, which is loaded by the webpack, let me review. So let me check again the application. So in this application, I have an Andy application, and just what is Andy? Andy is if you go to and.design, this is a set of components created for Ant Financial, which is a company on the umbrella of Alibaba consortium, which is one of the biggest companies in the world. It's a Chinese giant, and then decided to create some user interface to create React components. So they create components with the same with a similar style in terms of UX in order to create a consistent application in React, but using the same layout. Because one of the problems with Angular and other libraries like Vue or something is like if you find different providers, then you need to work more in terms of the style to try to all the components look similar. So at least not obviously not all components are covered here, but I guess I could say 90% of the components you need are covered in this library. There are many other libraries you could use whatever you want, but I found this really easy to implement them in my projects. Okay, so let's go back to the project. Okay, so in this case, in order to create your React application, of course, you need to run the import. So this is code is ES6, and this cannot be understood by all their browsers. So this is similar to Java, that you need to import your modules or your libraries. In this case, the minimum I need to React and use React Done. On top of that, I am using Andy or Undesign, and those are the components I am going to use in my form. So after import, I create a constant for item, and then I use another for select options. And after that, I create this is a basic variable objects in Node.js. In this case, I am trying to create a drop down, a fancy drop down using some Chinese provinces, which is this. Let me go to the example. You see this? This is a fancy drop down to select between province, city, and district. Yeah, let me check if I have any question here. Well, not far. Okay, let's go over to the code. Okay, so after that, I am going to use a form create. This is a concept inside ND, right? Because it's a component for ND, and then I am going to create a class in React. And in this class, there are two ways to create a component to an object in React. Create class is one, and component is another. There are subtle differences, like in a class we have get initial state, but in a component we have a constructor. Um, because the new version of React is just about to be released, the 16 version, they recommend to use components instead of classes. But all the samples you are going to find, they are usually this like this. So handle submit is a custom function. Handle plus password blur is a custom function. Check pass, check confirm is a custom function. The standard function is render. So the idea is in a React project, you are oriented to render some stuff in your single page application only if the state change. So in the inside your render, you have to define, you have to return as any function, and the return define what is going to be rendered in your site. The previous step is just some preparation about how you are going to prepare to present the information. In this case, I am just setting some information about the layout and some information about the variables I am going to use and what action I am going to use. Okay, so the components I used from Andy is are returned in the return of the render function. So the first, I am going to create a form object where I'm saying, okay, this form is going to be handled for this function, handle submit. And inside, I am going to create some items. So check it out, this is not HTML. So the idea of the developers, actually, they don't need to know HTMLs. They don't need to use jQuery or something to try to find a done element to be rendered. Everything is handled by React. And then you just need to use the API of a component to try to provide information. So in this case, I am using some proper elements about ND to try to define the labels uh, to define the validator and the message. So all these components just create an input, and everything is the API for from Andy to try to include validation about the type. So if I check this, all this is about this. So if I do this, immediately I say I get a message, the input is not a valid email. So I didn't create a function to validate if it's an email or not. I just define what is the message if it's not an email, because all this code is replaced by this action. And this is what I found interesting in components. The idea is you don't need to write everything, because thinking about this concept like a created headless application, like don't use Drupal or Symfony to anything, or only use for as a data server, is like a, if you are going to this direction, you miss a lot of functions created for this frameworks or CMS. Like in this simple case, like a validate an email. This is a really simple task in Symfony, a really simple task in Drupal. But if you are going to migrate to JavaScript, it's a time-consuming task. I'm not saying it's difficult, but if you need to create everything from scratch, it's a really time-consuming. So the idea is using components that are prepared for everything, and not just the validation, because you see immediately I get some different uh, visual layout. In this case, the red stuff. If you and this is created by Andy by default. If you don't have, you need to create for by yourself. Well, let me put some valid email, and then the message is gone. The same with this, and immediately the components validate that those passwords are not the same, and so on, right? The rest of the validation, and here, and then I have the validation of register. Okay, so let me check about the other components. So this is another input for the password, and the handle for this is a specific function to compare the values. This is a tooltip about how to create the other elements. And this is the fancy cascader, which is a fancy select, and the captcha and the agreement checkbox. Okay. So if I provide all information, let me 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so da, 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 da. Register, nothing happened because the function I create, go here, okay, is handle function. Handle submit. So what I am saying here, okay, first stop the submit at the button, then uh, this is an internal function for Andy. This is validate all fields before to submit, and if there is an error, then scroll to that. If there is not error, then print something in the console. So I'm going to inspect just to check, and I'm going to submit again, and then again, okay, I received those values, so I receive an object with the values I enter in the form. Okay, so the idea is React is only for presentation, it's not a framework. So the idea is if you use the proper components, you could have a better US experience for your users, but still you need to use something to try to store the information, right? This is the in an MVC pattern development. React is only this model. The model could be something like Symfony and Drupal. The controller could be something in React with some components like a React router, or could be the routing inside Drupal or Symfony or whatever. And the view is the part of the React. So in this case, what I recommend is when you have all this information, then you need to do some Ajax information, Ajax request to get some information from your API. That could be maybe another Node.js application using Express or something like that, or could be a Drupal application, or could be a Symfony application. and the response could be, if there is maybe nothing failed until here, but maybe if you do a Ajax request to do a submit or a validation of some information, and then if that API return an error, then you could send the message to the user using the React components, right? Because maybe we are trying to create a user, and then they say no, this nickname is used. So then you have the using the API of ND, you could send the failure. Please choose a different object. Or when is everything go okay using the routine, you could just go to the next step in order to do this. So why I do this? Because as I said before, handless applications are, you gain a lot, but this is like the Harry Potter character is almost decapitated. Then I remember the name of the guy. It's like you could get some fancy components using React in your application, but you don't need to leave completely what you use to development. You could use Ruby, and then you could combine with this. You could use Symfony, and you could combine this. You could use Drupal, and you could combine this. So that means you are you are getting the best of two worlds in terms of presentation and in terms of reuse the whole logic provided by your favorite framework. And the benefit will be for your end user, and your applications could be delivered a little better because you are not concerned about many things you need to do if you jump directly everything to JavaScript. I'm not saying it's not a wrong approach, but if you don't have experience with that, maybe it could be a little difficult. So I hope you enjoy this session, and remember, the repository is in nsolution/react and the demo, and I hope you join us in the next session for we know trainings we do for in our internal team, but we love to provide to the rest of the world. Thank you so much.